Mathematics is the language of the universe. It is the foundation of all science, upon which rests the building of modern civilization. It is the cornerstone for the technological advancement of the human race. Isn't that exciting?
14.
92.
Columbus sailed the ocean blue?
Wacko,
Yes, Miss Flamille?
when an apple fell out of the tree and landed on Isaac Newton, what did it teach him?
To sit someplace else?
It taught him gravity, which he defined using mathematics. Dot,
Yes, Miss Flamille.
if you have 10 cookies and someone takes away half of them, what will they have?
A broken hand.
No,
They will if they try to take my cookies.
they're not trying to take your cookies.
Well, that's what you said.
That's not what I... Don't forget it. Just forget it, all right?
All right.
Now, where was I?
I don't know. You told me to forget.
Today's lesson is multiplication. Yakko,
Yes, Miss Flamille.
I want you to multiply 47 times 83.
Sounds like a song cue to me.
No, it doesn't.
Oh, yes, it does. Hit it, hurry! 7 times 3 is 21, which, as you know, is just 2 tens plus 1, and so we put the 1 right here, and we carry the 2 1 left to the top of the tens place right next door, and we put it on top of the number 4, which is really 4 tens that we multiply, times 3 in the ones place, and that's why we now have 12, which we add to the 2 that we carried to get 14. See how easy that was? Oh, it's multiplication, it's math education. Hey, Albert Einstein said that it's so easy to do. It's simple, it's breezy, it's fun and it's easy. Just buy a calculator, you can multiply too. And now the second digit. 7 times 8 is 56, which, as you know, is just 5 tens plus 6, and so we put the 6 right here in the tens place left of the 1, carry the 5 like we did before to the top of the tens place next to the 4, then multiply that 4 times 8 to get 32. See, isn't this great? Then we add the 5 that we carried before to get 37, then add once more straight down to get 3,901. Isn't this swell? Oh, let's give multiplication a standing ovation. Isaac Newton multiplied a couple times 2, times 2, times 2, times 2. It's simple, it's breezy, it's fun and it's easy. So buy a calculator and study this stuff later. Maybe someday you can multiply numbers 2, 3, 4, 5. Recess!
All right, today's lesson is on multiplication, but I am not going to make you do any math. We're going to leave the math to Jesus. He's going to handle that for us, and we are going to just look at the results. But before we get into that story, let's just see where we've come so far. We are in the book of John, and we have said that John's main point, as he writes this book, is to lay out for us the truth that Jesus is God, that Jesus and God are the same, and that works both ways, both that in Jesus being God, he has all the deity, all the power, all the omnipotence, the omniscience, everything that is God is in Jesus. But that the opposite of that is true as well, that everything that is Jesus is God. So as we see Jesus, as we see him interact with people, as we see him do things as he walks through this world and interacts with different people, we are seeing the heart and the mind of the God who created us. And that is just immensely personal and immensely intimate, that God would choose to show himself to us in that way. We saw that as Jesus walked this earth, he gave us signs, things that we would be able to see and recognize, to know that he is God, to know that he has that power, and to know that he has the authority. We've seen a couple of those so far through turning water into wine, through the healing of the official son, and we're actually going to see the third one today. We've seen him heal someone, and multiple times, and yet he's going to take it another level today. We see that Jesus did not come to simply give us more information. We saw this in that conversation with Nicodemus, where Nicodemus thought he was just coming to get smarter, to know something more about God. And what Jesus said was, that's not why he came. He didn't come to just give us an additional piece of information, but rather to change everything and change how everything works on this planet. Through an interaction with him, we no longer needed the purifying waters of the rituals. We didn't need the ritual sacrifices anymore, that we could have the grace, the forgiveness, the mercy of our God simply through our relationship with Jesus. Everything was changing. And through the testimony of John, we saw that from that point, when Jesus stepped on this earth, everything was going to be about him. And everything for the last 2,000 years has been looking back to this Jesus who came and changed everything on this planet. That's why John says that Jesus must increase, and I, whether that's John or Pastor Kyle or you, must decrease. It must be about him. We saw through his interaction with a lame man by the pool that Jesus sees us where we're at. That whether you have had the best week of your life and everything has turned up roses and everything you wanted you finally got, or whether this has been a terrible week that has left you devastated, Jesus sees you exactly where you are. He's with you exactly where you are. But that leads us to ask the question we saw last week, which is, who is Jesus to you? And a small clarification on this that I should have made last week is that who Jesus is to me does not change who Jesus is. Jesus is who Jesus is. That's John's whole point. Jesus is God. And if I see him otherwise, it does not make him what I see him. He is who he is. It does change how I see Jesus, and how I interact with Jesus changes me, changes who I am in response to that. And we talked about the fact that as Jesus enters our families, as Jesus enters into our thinking of church, as Jesus enters into our thinking of anything, work, family, anything, he changes who we are based on how we see him. And with that, we come to John chapter 6. And John chapter 6 starts like this. After this is after everything we saw in last week, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing on the sick. So John tells us a few different things here in this verse. First, that Jesus was not only doing the major signs that John's pointing out. See, John focuses on 7 major signs through the book of John. But through this verse, he's telling us, but they're not the only ones that Jesus is doing. He is also healing other sick people as he's going. He is performing other miracles as he's going. He is performing the signs that the Old Testament prophesied and told us that he would perform. But he also is telling us Jesus is starting to develop a bit of a following. People are starting to notice what's going on, and they're starting to be like, I want to see more of this. So there are actually large crowds starting to gather to follow Jesus wherever Jesus goes. If he's going from this town to that town, they pick up and they go with him, and it's growing, and it's becoming larger and larger as they go, which makes sense. If you have a favorite doctor who helped you overcome something in your life, you are likely going to tell a friend, hey, this made a big difference in my life. If you're dealing with the same thing, go see this doctor. If you have a favorite restaurant that serves your favorite meal, you are likely going to say, hey, this restaurant serves the best pizza ever. You should really go to this restaurant. And as this word is spreading that there's a guy walking through town who is literally talking to a guy who has not walked for 38 years. He is paralyzed, and he is saying to him, get up and walk, and the guy just gets up and walk. That's going to gain some popularity. People are going to notice that that's happening. And if they're struggling, they're going to want in on this deal. So they're following him because of the signs that he's been doing, the ways he's been healing the sick as he goes. So Jesus goes up on a mountain, and there he sits with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. A few things here. First, as his popularity grows, Jesus doesn't go like rent out a theater and try to get everybody to come to the theater to see how great he is. His popularity is growing, and he's like, yeah, let's go up on the mountain instead. He like disappears. And that's going to be a bit of a theme in today's verses, because this isn't the only time he's going to do that, just in the first part of John chapter 6. But then John tells us now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. This is going to be fairly informative to stuff that happens later in this passage. But at very least at this point, we know that means Jesus has likely been ministering for about a year. So while John tells us he's been around doing signs, to us, it's been a couple chapters. To us, it feels like, okay, so Jesus has been around for a few days doing some kind. No, we saw that he started his ministry around the time of Passover. And now it's Passover again. So it's been about a year that Jesus has been going around doing these miracles, doing these signs, and gathering this group that is choosing to follow him. He says, "In lifting up his eyes then, and seeing that a large crowd was coming towards him, Jesus said to Philip, where are we to buy bread, so that these people may eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. See, this is the start of a story that if you grew up in church, if you grew up around church, you've probably heard hundreds of times, because it's a fun one to tell with what Jesus is about to do. But we have to remember that Philip had no idea what Jesus was about to do. He had never seen anything like what Jesus is about to do. What Philip sees is a large crowd. We're about to see it's about 5,000 people. That is a lot of people. I don't know if you've ever been in a crowd of 5,000 people, but I can tell you that is a large number. To the point that as good as our kitchen crew is, and they are like the best kitchen crew a church could ever have. Yes, right? 5,000 is a lot of people to feed. An overwhelming number, even if you had all the money, even if you had all the food and it was all laid out in front of you, it would still be a logistical nightmare to then get that food to those people. The places that do it well are impressive. But 5,000 people is an overwhelming number of people. So Jesus looks at Philip and says, okay, there's 12 of us, 13 of us. How are we going to feed these people? But I love that John puts in here that Jesus was basically messing with Philip. He said this to test him. Jesus knew, he says he himself, that's Jesus, knew exactly what he was going to do. Jesus already had a plan. But he wanted to see what Philip thought. And I think John points this out because this is the question that John is going to keep asking, has been asking for 6 chapters. He's going to keep asking to the end of the book. Who is Jesus? So Jesus is asking Philip not, how are we going to get some bread? What Jesus is asking Philip is, who do you think I am? We've been walking together now for a year. You have been with me day in and day out for a year. What do you think's about to happen? You see 5,000 people, but you also know me. What do you think's going to happen next? Philip's answer to him is 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to even get a little bit. Philip sees the 5,000 people. He doesn't necessarily see Jesus for who he is yet. And I can't blame him. I do this to Jesus all the time. I've been walking with Jesus for more than a year, and I still regularly see the 5,000 people more than I see Jesus. But Philip's answer is, look, a denarii is about a day's wages. So he's saying, if we had 200 days worth of salary, or just over half a year's worth of salary, we would still not be able to buy enough bread to make sure that everybody got something. Much less feed them, much less let them be full. We couldn't even give them just a little bit, even if we had 200 days worth of salary to buy bread with. Philip's basically saying, Jesus, what are you talking about? This is not possible. One of his disciples, Andrew, that's Simon Peter's brother, said to him, well, there is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many? And I love Andrew here because I think Andrew and I are kindred spirits. Some of you have had the joy of working on vehicles with me. When we go to work on cars, I am useless. I'm beyond useless. So my whole job when working on cars, and anybody who's worked can testify to this, is to walk around and point out the crazy solution. It's I'm trying to get this bolt off the engine. The bolt's not coming off the engine, and I'm going, I wonder if we deflate the tires. Maybe that would work. That's not helpful. Every once in a while, you hit the crazy idea and it works. Who knows? But most of the time, it's not helpful. They're looking to feed 5,000 people. And Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, is the guy standing on the side going, I can't fix that problem, but this little boy has a sack lunch. Like, he's fed at least. At least we don't have to worry about him, right? Like, we only have to worry about the other 4,999 people. It's a crazy statement to make. But Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, throws it out that, well, this is what we do have. So Jesus says, have the people sit down. Now there was much grass in the place. That is just John's storyteller coming through and through. Like, he has to describe the environment. He's like, 5,000 people, food, these are all the important bits. Also, it was really grassy. Awesome. So the men sat down, and they were about 5,000 in number. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. That line is so small and so big all at once. Because remember Philip's answer. Philip's answer was focused on bare minimum. If we had 200 days' wages, we could reach the bare minimum. We could give everyone maybe a little bit. And yet Jesus comes, takes the 5 loaves, the 2 fishes that were presented to him, and multiplies them in such a way that he is giving people as much as they wanted. He goes from not bare minimum, but the over and above. As much as they wanted, they were able to eat. And he actually goes further than that. And when they had eaten their fill, when they were all full, he told his disciples, gather up the leftover fragments so that nothing may be lost. So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. And when the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, this is indeed the prophet who has come into the world. So not only has he not just given them a little, not only has he not just given them as much as they wanted, when they were all done, they gathered up leftovers and had over 12 baskets full of food that were left over that had not been eaten. And at this point, anybody in that crowd who was a doubter was sure. They knew who this Jesus was. It says when they saw this sign, this is the sign that John's talking about in chapter 6. I believe it's the 4th one we've seen now. When they see this sign that Jesus has done, they say, this is indeed the prophet who is coming to the world. They recognize him as being from God. That God has sent this Jesus because he is doing things that no one else can do. Philip said, basically, look, this thing is impossible. And then Jesus did the impossible. He didn't just do the impossible, he exceeded the impossible. He did things that people would never even have thought to ask him to do. Proving, again, that Jesus is God. That's John's whole point. Look how Jesus responds. Sorry. He has proven that he is the one who provides. When everyone else thinks it's impossible, when everyone else thinks it cannot be done, when everyone else thinks we're going to starve, Jesus is the one who provides. Now see what Jesus has done. He says, perceiving that they were about to come, take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. This is so contrary to my thoughts. And I would wager that most of us, this would be different than what we thought. If you all get together and get the community consensus, and you all decide that you would like to make me king, I'm in. Yeah, let's make that happen. That'll be awesome. It's just another way, though, that I'm not like Jesus. Because he says they're going to take him by force. I don't know why you would have to take anybody by force to make them king, but they're coming by force to make him king. And Jesus' response is not, it's about time. That would be mine if I was Jesus. It's, no, not yet. And he leaves back up the mountain. He has 5,000 people who want to make him king, and his response is, no thanks. I'll pass on that. And he withdraws back into the mountains by himself. Remember in our last chapter when he's going back and forth with the Pharisees, this is the very thing he says is why they should be believing in him. Because when everybody else wants to make him king, he is not seeking his own will, but he's seeking the will of his Father. And he knows at this point in time that what God wants him to do is to not be king. In fact, Jesus knows where this whole story is going. He knows that the end of this story is him dead, crucified on a cross. And if you put those two things side by side, I know which one I'm picking every time. And yet, because Jesus knew what the will of God in his life was, he chose the will of God over the easy route. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea. They got into a boat and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. These verses have always tripped me up. Like, they are hanging out. They have spent a year together. They've gone everywhere together. Jesus goes up into the mountain to pray, and the disciples are like, let's leave. What? Wait, the guy you're here with hasn't come off the mountain yet. It says it's dark and Jesus has not yet come to them. He is still up in the mountain and they're just like, yep, we're going back across the river. You got here by boat. They go home by boat. Leave Jesus behind. Never made sense, except what I saw earlier in this passage was the fact that John specifically pointed out that it was the Passover feast was coming. This would have been an obligation on any Jewish male, of which all of Jesus' disciples would have been Jewish males. They had to get to Jerusalem. If they didn't get to Jerusalem in time for the Passover, they would not have any of the benefits that come from the festival, and they would have been extremely ostracized by their community. They had to make sure they were in Jerusalem on time. My guess is they waited for Jesus for as long as they thought they could. But then they knew what the plan was. They knew what needed to happen in order to get it done, so they just went to get it done. They were done. They were tired of waiting on Jesus. Now, many of us are married and have spouses, and sometimes your house may be like mine, where one spouse is waiting in the car, while the other spouse is just going to be another minute, or just has to do one last thing before we go, or I'll be right out. Those are usually my lines in this story. The disciples have been waiting for Jesus past the one more moment, past the one last thing, past all that, and they're like, we have to go. If we are going to do what we need to do, we have to leave Jesus behind. And as they're going, the sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. And when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea, coming near the boat, and they were frightened. So they set out. The sea is rough. It's making their life difficult. They are not getting across this river as quickly as they thought, or this lake as quickly as they thought. And it's starting to get shaky, whether they're going to make it across at all. And then they look out, and there's Jesus. Just walking on the water, walking beside them. And it's like, I'm trying to put myself in their shoes and see this how they would see it. They are rowing for their lives, which if you've ever tried to row a boat on rough seas, you know what that's like, the up and down, the craziness of it. And then they look over, and there's Jesus. And then it says Jesus it's like he looked over, it was like, oh, hey guys, and just walks towards their boat. This is craziness that they are witnessing. They must think we've lost our minds. Like we've been rowing so hard for so long that we are losing our minds, and they are frightened. They are terrified. But he says to them, "It is I. Do not be afraid." And something about that interaction with Jesus standing next to their boat, reassuring them of who he is in that moment, they feel peace. Because at that point, they were glad to take him into the boat. And this line is crazy because John throws it in almost secondhand. He doesn't reference it as a sign or anything. It says, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. They had rowed like 3 or 4 miles. They would have been in the middle of the sea. They see this Jesus walking on the water. He comes over to their boat, tells them who he is. He gets in the boat, and as soon as he gets in the boat, they're the rest of the way over on the other side of the lake, where they were going all along, which makes no sense. The sea was rough. There was a better chance they ended up at the bottom of the ocean than where they wanted to go. Even if they were rowing correctly, even if it was a calm or just a rough sea and they were experienced fishermen and they were rowing correctly, if you've done that on rough waters, you know how hard it is to hit your target when the sea is trying to get you everywhere but your target. But as soon as Jesus steps in the boat, they were exactly where they wanted to go. How often do we do this to Jesus, though? Jesus, you don't understand. We know where we need to go. We know when we need to be there. We've got this all planned out. See, we put together this awesome 3-year plan, God, and we have to be there at the end of 3 years, which means if you're not coming now, we're just going to have to leave without you. God, if you've told us what we need to do. If you're not going to come along with us, we're just going to go do it without you. And we do. And we find ourselves on some rough seas. And when we find ourselves on these rough seas, we look around going, where is God in this? Why isn't God here where I expected him to be? Well, because you left him behind on the mountain. You left without him. And then we look up and find that, after all, he wasn't that far away anyway. Because even when we go out, even when we leave without him, even when we decide this is the direction we need to go, we don't need him to come with us anymore. He is still willing to meet us where we are. And as the apostles look up in their distress, wishing that Jesus was in the boat with them, but realizing they left him behind, there he is. Right where he needs to be, right where they need him to be. And when he rejoins them, they end up exactly where they were going anyway. I just think that that's a cool part of this story. But so what? What does any of this really have to do with us? Well, first, we have to recognize Jesus is always capable of providing what we desire. If you have something in your life that you have been praying for, if you have something in your life that you have wanted and you have been asking Jesus for, and you don't have it, it's not because he's incapable of giving it to you. See, so often in my mind, when I say things like, well, pray about it, but then I always want to work in a caveat because God might not do it, I think it ends up making it in my mind like he's just not quite capable of doing it. If he wanted to do it, he could. And I diminish the power of my God by thinking if he hasn't given it to me, it must be because he isn't able to. It's not that. Jesus, God, is always capable of providing the things that we desire. But sometimes, Jesus' plans make no sense. Sometimes they look like the craziest thing ever to us. Because we see his plan and we see it from our perspective. He sees his plan, he operates his plan from his perspective. And guess whose perspective is better? It's not mine. So even if it makes no sense to us, we need to acknowledge that if God is not giving us the thing we want, it is not because he is not able, but rather because his perspective is better than my perspective, and I need to trust that he has a good, and not just a good, but a perfect reason for saying no. Because Jesus knows more than we do. Now, look, I am not saying that Jesus knew they were going to end up on a rough sea. But it does strike me that Jesus didn't want to leave when the disciples wanted to leave. And as they rowed out, they ended up on a rough sea, whereas if they had waited till the next morning, Jesus may have come down off that mountain. They might have gotten in the boat then and might have sailed across with no problem. I don't know, because they didn't. I do know that when they chose to leave, they chose to do it without his input, and they ended up in the middle of the rough sea. We need to acknowledge as we pray, as we beseech God, as we look for him to do things in our lives, that at the end of the day, he knows more than we do. We can trust that in that infinite knowledge, in that omniscience that he has, where he knows everything, he knows what's better for us than we do. And that he is looking out for our best, even when we are not. That he sees you where you're at. That he knows what's going on in your life. He knows the desire of your heart. And knowing all of that, and having an eternal perspective, he has chosen to answer your prayers the way he has because he is looking out for you. And what is best for you, and what is best for his plan, his mission for this world. So here's the practical piece. Here's the thing I want you to do with this information, because all of that is informational still. It's still not a real tangible application point. I'm going to give you a full 60 seconds, which I know sounds like no time at all. It will feel like an eternity when we're sitting here quietly. But I am going to give you a full 60 seconds, and here is what I want you to do. I want you to first think about the thing that you have been praying for, the thing that you have been laying out for God, saying, God, this is the thing that I desired. Why are you not giving it to me? Think about that thing. And then I want you to write it down. I want you to write it down on a piece of paper. Type it into your phone. If you don't like the whole physical, tangible paper, type it into your phone. I don't care, but write it down. I'm going to give you 60 seconds to do that. Apparently that second hand isn't working, so I'll use this one. 60 seconds. Go. All right, that's the 60 seconds. Here's what I want you to do with that. I want you to put it somewhere where you will see it every day this week. Some of you, that'll be a bathroom mirror. Some of you, that'll be your nightstand. Some of you, it'll be the home screen of your phone, so that every time you look at your phone 8,000 times a day, you see the thing. And every time you see it this week, I want you to pray this. I want you to say, God, will you show me your perspective on this? Will you show this to me how you see it? Because he'll answer that one of two ways. Either he will shift your focus and you will see it in a whole new light, and the way you pray about that thing moving forward will be different, or he won't. He may just answer that prayer with, trust me. Trust me. I fed 5,000. I walked on water. I made lame people walk. I healed sick kids. I need you to trust me that what we're doing, you and I, we're doing for your good. It's going to turn out for you. He may change your perspective, or he may ask you to trust him. Either way, we get to experience in our lives what the disciples got to experience in this day with Jesus, knowing that he can provide everything we desire. And sometimes he lets us row 3 or 4 miles in rough sea before he shows up to shift our perspective. Either way, we know that Jesus is God, and Jesus we can trust. Father, I thank you that you have given me some tangible ways to experience this week. I pray that as we go into this next week, we will continue to lay our requests before you, knowing that you hear, knowing that you care, knowing that you want to help. But Father, also knowing that you are more important than me. You are more important than us. Your goals, your perspective, your mission is higher than my comfort. God, that is not easy to say. Because that sounds like it's going to hurt. But I thank you that that is not your desire for my life. That you desire a relationship that would be free of pain. But Father, I thank you that you're willing to let pain come where it makes me better. I thank you that you are willing to use every single hurt in our lives to make us more like you. Father, I pray that you would strengthen us, encourage us, and help us as we submit to that, as we let you do that for us. Father, I thank you and I pray in your Son's name. Amen.